The city lights shimmered like stars scattered across the sky. Cars honked in the distance, and laughter echoed through the streets as people enjoyed their Friday evening. It was one of those nights where everything felt alive, buzzing with energy and possibility. For Maya Thompson, it was a moment to pause and celebrate herself. After months of hard work, sleepless nights, and juggling endless deadlines, she finally had a chance to breathe. At 28 years old, Maya had built a life many dreamed of: a successful career as a marketing executive, financial stability, and a quiet confidence that made her stand out in any room. That night, Maya decided to treat herself to dinner at Leo Grandeur, one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city. Known for its Michelin-starred chefs and opulent decor, the restaurant attracted wealthy businessmen, celebrities, and socialites. As she stepped out of her car, wearing an elegant, black dress that hugged her figure perfectly, Maya felt a sense of pride. This wasn't just about indulging in fine dining, it was about reminding herself of how far she'd come. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, she had faced countless challenges. But tonight, she belonged here, among the glittering chandeliers and polished silverware. Inside the restaurant, the air smelled of fresh herbs and rich sauces simmering in the kitchen. The host greeted her with a warm smile and led her to a cozy table by the window. From her seat, Maya could see the bustling street below, where couples strolled hand in hand and taxis zipped past. She ordered a glass of red wine and opened the menu, savoring the anticipation of what promised to be a delicious meal. For a while, everything seemed perfect. The soft jazz music playing in the background added to the ambiance, and the waitstaff moved gracefully between tables, ensuring every guest felt attended to. Maya allowed herself to relax, letting the stress of the week melt away. She thought about her childhood, the cramped apartment she shared with her siblings, the long hours her mother worked to make ends meet, and the sacrifices they all made so she could pursue her dreams. Tonight she wanted to honor them by simply enjoying this moment. But perfection is fragile, and Maya's peaceful evening was about to shatter. Unbeknownst to her, 2 police officers were making their way toward the restaurant. They weren't there for a romantic dinner or to enjoy the culinary delights. Instead, they had been called in response to a vague report of a suspicious person loitering near the entrance. Details were scarce: no name, no clear description, but the officers arrived ready to investigate. As they entered the dimly lit space, one officer scanned the room while the other spoke briefly with the manager. Their eyes darted around, taking in the patrons seated at various tables. It didn't take long for their gaze to settle on Maya. To them, something about her presence seemed off. Her expensive outfit, her calm demeanor, even the fact that she was dining alone raised questions in their minds. Prejudice clouded their judgment, turning curiosity into suspicion. Without hesitation, one of the officers approached Maya's table. His boots clicked against the marble floor, drawing attention from nearby diners. Maya looked up, surprised to see him standing there. Before she could say anything, he spoke, his tone sharp and commanding. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said loudly enough for those around them to hear. "Can I see some ID?" Maya blinked, caught off guard by the request. Confusion flickered across her face. "I'm sorry, why do you need my ID?" she asked politely, though her heart began to race. Something about the situation felt wrong. The officer crossed his arms, his expression unyielding. "We received reports of someone acting strangely outside. You fit the description." Her stomach dropped. Fit the description? What did that even mean? Maya hadn't done anything unusual, she was simply having dinner. Yet, deep down, she knew exactly why she was being targeted. It wasn't her actions. It was her skin color. This wasn't the first time she'd encountered racial profiling, but each instance left a bitter taste in her mouth. Still, Maya tried to stay composed. She didn't want to cause a scene or give them any reason to escalate the situation. "Officer, I'm just having dinner here," she explained calmly. "I haven't done anything wrong." But the second officer chimed in, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Yeah, sure. We'll be the judge of that. Let's see some ID." Whispers rippled through the restaurant as other patrons watched the exchange unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as if unsure whether to intervene. Others glanced away, pretending not to notice. For Maya, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on her chest. She wasn't just being questioned. She was being humiliated, treated as though she didn't belong in such a prestigious place because of the color of her skin. Reluctantly, Maya reached into her purse and handed over her driver's license. The officers examined it closely, muttering to each other under their breath. Then came the comment that cut deeper than any insult ever had. One of them smirked and said, Didn't think someone like you could afford a place like this. Someone like you." Those 3 words carried layers of bias, condescension, and disrespect. Maya's jaw tightened as anger bubbled beneath the surface. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Here she was working harder than most, achieving success on her own terms, and yet these men saw her only as a stereotype, a black woman who didn't belong in a fancy restaurant. For a brief moment, Maya considered staying silent, swallowing the indignity like she had done so many times before, but something inside her snapped. No more. Not tonight. Not when she had worked so hard to claim her place in the world. With newfound resolve, Maya straightened her posture and met the officers, gaze head-on. What happened next would change everything, for her, for the officers, and for everyone watching. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. "Didn't think someone like you could afford a place like this," the officer had sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. Maya's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let her emotions get the better of her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before responding. "Someone like me," she repeated slowly, her voice calm but firm. "What exactly does that mean?" Her question caught the officer off guard. He hesitated for a split second, glancing at his partner as if seeking backup. But instead of backing down, he doubled down, his tone growing more dismissive. "You know what I mean," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "This isn't your kind of place." Maya felt a surge of anger rising within her, but she forced herself to stay composed. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on the officer's face. "Let me make one thing clear," she said, her voice steady despite the fire burning inside her. "I have every right to be here. If you're accusing me of something, you need to tell me exactly what it is, and you'd better have proof." The second officer stepped closer, his posture aggressive. "We don't need to explain ourselves to you," he snapped. "Just show us some respect." Respect? Maya almost laughed at the irony. Here they were, demanding respect while treating her like a criminal without any justification. She clenched her fists under the table, fighting the urge to lash out. Instead, she raised an eyebrow, her expression radiating quiet defiance. "Respect is earned, not demanded," she shot back. "And so far, you haven't given me much reason to respect you." The tension in the room was palpable now. Other diners had stopped pretending not to notice. Conversations had died down, replaced by whispers and nervous glances. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. A few servers hovered nearby, exchanging worried looks. Even the manager, who had been observing from a distance, began inching closer, clearly sensing that the situation was escalating. One of the officers reached for his handcuffs, his movements deliberate and intimidating. "You're causing a disturbance," he barked. "Come with us quietly or we'll arrest you." Maya's mind raced. Arrest her? For what? Simply existing in a space where someone like her supposedly didn't belong? The absurdity of it all made her blood boil, but she knew better than to let fear take over. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. With a swift motion, she opened the camera app and started recording the interaction. "Go ahead," she said, holding the phone up so it captured both officers clearly. "Arrest me for no reason. See how far that gets you once this video goes viral." Her words hit like a thunderclap. The officers froze, their confidence faltering for the first time. They glanced at each other, suddenly aware that they were being recorded. The restaurant fell eerily silent, everyone watching to see what would happen next. Maya didn't flinch. She kept the camera trained on them, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "You can't record."
Us!
One of the officers protested, his voice tinged with panic. "Actually, I can," Maya replied coolly. "This is a public place and I have every right to document what's happening. So unless you want the entire internet to see how you treat innocent people based on nothing but prejudice, I suggest you rethink your approach." The manager finally stepped in, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Officers, please," he said, his voice trembling. "There must be some misunderstanding. Ms. Thompson is a valued guest here. She hasn't done anything wrong." The officers ignored him, their focus still on Maya. But their bravado was crumbling. One of them muttered under his breath, clearly frustrated, while the other reluctantly lowered his hand from his handcuffs. They exchanged another glance, silently weighing their options. Arresting her would only make things worse, especially with the video evidence, but letting her go felt like admitting defeat. Meanwhile, Maya continued speaking, her voice carrying just enough authority to command attention. "Let's be clear about something," she said, addressing both the officers and the growing audience of onlookers. "This isn't just about me. It's about the countless black men and women who are treated this way every single day. We work hard, we succeed, and yet we're constantly reminded that some people don't think we deserve to be in spaces like this. Well, I'm not going anywhere, and neither should anyone else who has earned their place." Her words resonated deeply with those around her. Several patrons nodded in agreement while others whispered words of encouragement. Even the waitstaff, who had initially seemed hesitant to get involved, now stood closer, offering subtle support. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted, from passive observation to active solidarity. Realizing they were losing control of the situation, the officers decided to retreat. One of them grumbled something about filing a report, but it was clear they were grasping at straws. As they turned to leave, Maya called after them, her voice ringing out loud and clear. "Don't worry. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly how you treated me tonight." With that, the officers stormed out of the restaurant, leaving behind a trail of awkward silence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the room. It started with a few claps, hesitant at first but soon grew into a full-blown ovation. Strangers approached Maya's table, shaking her hand and thanking her for standing up to injustice. Waiters brought her complimentary drinks, and the manager personally apologized, promising to ensure such an incident never happened again. But Maya knew this wasn't just about her. This was bigger than one night at a fancy restaurant. This was about exposing the systemic racism that permeated society, the same biases that led two police officers to assume she didn't belong simply because of the color of her skin. As she sat there, surrounded by supporters, she made a decision. She wouldn't let this moment pass unnoticed. She would use it to shine a light on the issues that needed addressing. Within minutes, Maya uploaded the video to her social media accounts. Her followers, numbering in the thousands, wasted no time sharing it across platforms. Hashtags like Justice for Maya and End Racial Profiling began trending almost instantly. People were outraged, not only by the officers' behavior but also by the audacity of their insults. News outlets picked up the story and talk shows invited commentators to weigh in. By the time Maya left the restaurant hours later, the incident had already gained national attention. As she walked out into the cool night air, Maya felt a mix of emotions: anger, exhaustion, and a strange sense of empowerment. She knew the fight was far from over, but she also knew she had taken the first step toward making a difference. And for now, that was enough. The video of Maya's confrontation with the officer spread like wildfire. Within hours, it had been viewed millions of times, shared across social media platforms, and picked up by major news outlets. People everywhere were talking about it. Some praised Maya for her courage, while others criticized the officers' actions, calling them out for their blatant prejudice. The restaurant, once known only for its luxurious ambiance and gourmet dishes, was now at the center of a national conversation about racial profiling and police misconduct. For Maya, the whirlwind of attention was overwhelming. She woke up the next morning to hundreds of notifications on her phone, messages of support, interview requests, and even death threats from trolls who disagreed with her stance. At first, she felt paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of it all. How could one moment in a restaurant spark such a massive reaction? But as she scrolled through the comments and watched the hashtags trend online, she realized something important. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every black person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. And if she could use her voice to amplify their stories, then she owed it to them, and to herself, to keep going. That afternoon, Maya decided to address the public directly. Sitting in her living room, she turned on her laptop and logged into her Instagram account. With a deep breath, she hit live and began speaking to her followers. "Hi everyone," she started, her voice steady despite the storm swirling inside her. "I want to thank you all for standing with me during this time. What happened last night wasn't easy, but I'm glad it brought attention to an issue that affects so many people." She went on to share more about her experience, not just from that night, but throughout her life. Growing up, she had faced countless instances of racism, from being followed around stores to being underestimated in professional settings. Each incident chipped away at her confidence, making her question whether she truly belonged. But over time, she learned to push back, refusing to let others define her worth. Last night, she explained, was no different. "When those officers insulted me, they weren't just attacking me personally. They were attacking my identity, my dignity, and my right to exist without judgment. And I couldn't stay silent." Her words resonated deeply with viewers. Thousands tuned in to watch the live stream, leaving supportive comments and sharing their own experiences in the chat. One woman wrote, "I've been profiled at work and in stores too. Thank you for speaking out." Another added, "Your bravery gives me hope that things can change." As the days passed, the momentum only grew stronger. Activists reached out to Maya, inviting her to speak at rallies and panel discussions. Civil rights organizations offered their support, helping her navigate the legal process of filing a formal complaint against the officers. Meanwhile, protests erupted outside the local police department, with demonstrators holding signs that read, "Justice for Maya" and "End Systemic Racism." Celebrities joined the movement, amplifying her story on their platforms and urging their fans to demand accountability, but not everyone was supportive. Alongside the praise came backlash. Trolls flooded her social media accounts, accusing her of exaggerating the situation or seeking fame. Some argued that the officers were just doing their job, dismissing her claims of racial profiling as mere sensitivity. Even members of her own community questioned whether she was making too big a deal out of what they saw as a minor incident. "Why are you stirring up trouble?" one relative asked during a phone call. "Can't you just move on?" Maya felt the weight of these criticisms, but she refused to let them break her spirit. Instead, she leaned on her support system, her closest friends, her colleagues, and the strangers who had rallied behind her online. Together, they reminded her why it was important to keep fighting. "This isn't just your battle," her best friend Sarah told her during one particularly tough moment. "You're standing up for all of us. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." Determined to turn the negativity into fuel, Maya focused on taking concrete action. She met with lawyers to discuss potential legal steps, including filing a lawsuit against the officers and the police department. She also worked with advocacy groups to draft petitions demanding policy changes aimed at addressing implicit bias in law enforcement. These petitions quickly gained traction, collecting hundreds of thousands of signatures within days. At the same time, Maya continued using her platform to educate others. She posted articles and resources about racial profiling, encouraging her followers to learn more about the issue. She highlighted stories of other victims of discrimination, ensuring their voices were heard alongside hers. Through it all, she remained steadfast in her message. Silence is complicity. If people wanted real change, they had to speak up, even when it was uncomfortable. Back at the police department, the fallout from the incident was undeniable. Internal Affairs launched an investigation into the officer's conduct, reviewing body cam footage and interviewing witnesses from the restaurant. Public pressure mounted, with calls for transparency and accountability echoing louder each day. Protesters gathered outside the station daily, chanting slogans and holding candlelight vigils in solidarity with Maya. Even some of the officers' colleagues distanced themselves, embarrassed by the stain on their department's reputation. Despite the mounting scrutiny, the two officers involved dug in their heels, refusing to apologize or acknowledge any wrongdoing. In interviews with internal investigators, they claimed they were simply following protocol and denied targeting Maya based on her race. Their defense, however, rang hollow to many. Social media users dissected their statements, pointing out inconsistencies and contradictions. Memes mocking their excuses began circulating online, further tarnishing their credibility. Meanwhile, Maya prepared for the long road ahead. She knew the fight wouldn't be easy. Challenging systemic racism required patience, persistence, and resilience, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Across the country, people were waking up to the realities of racial injustice, inspired by her courage to stand her ground. For every insult hurled at her, there were 10 messages of encouragement. For every troll trying to silence her, there were 20 allies ready to amplify her voice. One evening, as she sat on her couch scrolling through yet another wave of notifications, Maya paused to reflect. Just a week ago, she had been an ordinary woman enjoying a quiet dinner. Now she was at the forefront of a movement, a symbol of resistance and hope. The journey ahead would be challenging, but she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced before. This wasn't just about seeking justice for herself. It was about creating a world where no one else had to endure what she had gone through. And so, Maya vowed to keep pushing forward. No matter how hard the battle became, she would not back down. Because in standing her ground, she had found not only her strength but also her mission. The ripple effect of Maya's video was nothing short of extraordinary. What started as a personal act of defiance quickly grew into a nationwide movement, fueled by the power of social media and collective outrage. Within days, her story had transcended borders, reaching audiences in countries far beyond her own. People from all walks of life, students, professionals, activists, and everyday citizens, were sharing her video, discussing her courage, and calling for systemic change. For Maya, it was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Every morning she woke up to a flood of notifications. Messages poured in from strangers thanking her for speaking out, while others shared their own stories of discrimination and resilience. Some sent heartfelt words of encouragement, while others offered advice on navigating the legal process or dealing with trolls. Despite the negativity that came her way, the overwhelming support kept Maya grounded. She realized she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was carrying the hopes of countless others who saw themselves in her struggle. As the hashtag Justice for Maya continued to trend, the conversation expanded beyond her individual experience. People began sharing articles, videos, and infographics about racial profiling, police misconduct, and systemic racism. Influencers with massive followings used their platforms to amplify her message, urging their fans to educate themselves and take action. Celebrities posted impassioned speeches, calling for accountability and reform. Even late-night talk show hosts dedicated segments to Maya's story, using humor and satire to highlight the absurdity of the officer's behavior. One particularly viral moment occurred when a popular comedian recreated the scene from the restaurant, playing both Maya and the officers in a sketch that went viral. The video ended with a poignant message. If you think this is funny, imagine living it. Millions watched the clip, laughing at first but then pausing to reflect on its deeper meaning. It became one of the most shared posts of the week, further cementing Maya's place in the cultural zeitgeist. Meanwhile, petitions demanding justice for Maya gained unprecedented traction. One petition, created by a grassroots organization, surpassed 2 million signatures within 48 hours. Another, launched by a coalition of civil rights groups, called for immediate policy changes within the police department, including mandatory bias training and stricter accountability measures. Lawmakers took notice, with several politicians issuing statements of support and pledging to introduce legislation aimed at addressing racial profiling. But perhaps the most impactful aspect of the movement was the wave of solidarity it inspired. Across the country, people organized rallies and marches in honor of Maya. In cities large and small, protesters gathered outside police stations, holding signs that read, "Black Lives Matter," "End Racial Profiling," and "We Stand with Maya." Some events featured speakers who had faced similar injustices, while others included moments of silence for victims of police brutality. At one rally in New York City, thousands chanted Maya's name, turning her into a symbol of hope and resistance. Back in Maya's hometown, the protests were especially intense. Demonstrators camped outside the police department for days, refusing to leave until concrete steps were taken to address the issue. Local businesses showed their support by displaying posters in their windows and donating food and supplies to the protesters. Even some members of the community who initially doubted Maya's intentions began to see the bigger picture, joining the demonstrations and speaking out against systemic racism. For the officers involved, the backlash was swift and severe. Their Q names were leaked online, along with details about their backgrounds and past conduct. Social media users dissected their records, uncovering instances where they had been accused of misconduct before. Photos of them surfaced, often accompanied by mocking captions or memes. Friends and family distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the controversy. One officer's teenage son reportedly faced bullying at school, with classmates, taunting him about his father's actions. Internally, the police department scrambled to contain the damage. A press conference was hastily arranged, during which the chief issued a vague apology and promised a thorough investigation. But the public wasn't satisfied. Protesters booed during the announcement, accusing the department of protecting its own rather than seeking real accountability. Calls for the officers' resignation or termination grew louder, with many arguing that their continued presence on the force undermined trust between law enforcement and the community. Amid the chaos, Maya remained focused. She worked tirelessly with her legal team to file formal complaints against the officers, providing evidence from the video and witness testimonies from the restaurant. She also collaborated with advocacy organizations to draft proposals for policy reforms, emphasizing the need for transparency, accountability, and education within law enforcement. Her goal wasn't just to punish those responsible. It was to create lasting change that would prevent similar incidents in the future. Despite the mounting pressure, the officers clung to their version of events. During interviews with internal investigators, they doubled down on their claims of innocence, insisting they had acted appropriately given the circumstances. However, inconsistencies in their stories began to surface. Witnesses from the restaurant contradicted their accounts, recalling how aggressively they had treated Maya. Body cam footage, though limited, showed glimpses of the confrontation, further undermining their credibility. The tide turned decisively when a server from the restaurant came forward with new information. In an emotional interview with a local news station, the young woman described overhearing the officers making derogatory comments about Maya before approaching her table. They said things like, "She doesn't look like she belongs here," the server recalled, tears streaming down her face. It was clear they were targeting her because of her race. The revelation sent shockwaves through the public discourse. Outrage reached new heights, with calls for immediate consequences growing louder. Protesters added the server's testimony to their chants, shouting, "We heard what you said," outside the police station. Even some members of the police department expressed discomfort, privately admitting that the officers' behavior reflected poorly on the entire force. Faced with mounting evidence and public pressure, the police department finally took decisive action. Both officers were placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. While the move was seen as a step in the right direction, many felt it wasn't enough. Activists demanded their permanent removal from the force, arguing that anyone capable of such blatant prejudice had no business wearing a badge. Through it all, Maya stayed true to her mission. She gave interviews, attended rallies, and spoke at panel discussions, using every opportunity to shed light on the broader issues at play. Her eloquence and poise earned her widespread admiration, transforming her from a victim of injustice into a leader in the fight for equality. Friends joked that she had become an accidental activist, but Maya didn't mind the label. If anything, she embraced it, knowing that her voice could inspire others to join the cause. By the end of the month, Maya's story had achieved what few thought possible. It had sparked a national reckoning on racial profiling and police accountability. Conversations that had long been ignored were now front and center, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about bias and privilege. For Maya, the journey was far from over, but she found solace in knowing that her courage had ignited a movement, one that showed no signs of slowing down. And so, as she stood on stage at a packed auditorium, delivering a speech to a crowd of cheering supporters, Maya allowed herself a rare moment of pride. This wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for everyone who believed in justice, fairness, and the power of standing up against oppression. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she wouldn't face them alone. The fallout from Maya's confrontation with the officers continued to reverberate through the city and beyond. What had started as a single incident in a luxury restaurant had spiraled into a national reckoning, exposing deep-seated issues of racial bias and systemic injustice. For the two officers involved, the consequences were swift and severe. Their actions, once shielded by anonymity, were now under intense scrutiny, not just from internal investigators, but from an entire nation watching closely. As weeks passed, details of the investigation began to emerge. Internal Affairs reviewed body cam footage, interviewed witnesses, and examined past complaints against the officers. The server's testimony proved pivotal, corroborating Maya's account and painting a damning picture of their behavior. Social media users dissected every update, analyzing each piece of evidence as if it were part of a high-stakes courtroom drama. Memes mocking the officers went viral, while hashtags like accountability now dominated Twitter trends. Despite their attempts to defend themselves, cracks began to show in the officers' stories. During follow-up interviews, inconsistencies emerged, details that didn't align with witness accounts or surveillance footage from the restaurant. One officer claimed he hadn't used derogatory language, only for the server's statement to directly contradict him. Another insisted they were simply doing their job, yet couldn't explain why Maya, a law-abiding citizen enjoying dinner, had been singled out in the first place. These contradictions fueled public outrage, further eroding any remaining credibility they might have had. Meanwhile, protesters remained steadfast in their demands for accountability. Outside the police department, rallies grew larger and more vocal. People carried signs bearing Maya's face alongside slogans like "No justice, no peace," and "Respect Black women." Speakers at these events shared personal stories of discrimination, creating a powerful sense of solidarity. Some even organized letter-writing campaigns, flooding City Hall and government offices with messages urging officials to take decisive action. The pressure mounted until it became impossible to ignore. In a highly anticipated press conference, the police chief announced that both officers would be suspended indefinitely without pay, pending further review. While the decision was met with cautious optimism, many activists argued it wasn't enough. Protesters demanded termination, pointing out that suspensions allowed the officers to return after the dust settled. They wanted accountability that sent a clear message. Biased policing would no longer be tolerated. For Maya, the developments were bittersweet. On one hand, she felt vindicated knowing her voice had forced the system to respond. On the other hand, she recognized how rare such outcomes were. Countless others who had faced similar injustices never saw justice served. Their cases often disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. Maya knew her visibility played a significant role in keeping the spotlight on this issue, a privilege many didn't have. Still, she refused to let the moment pass quietly. Instead, she seized the opportunity to push for broader reforms. Working closely with civil rights organizations, she drafted policy proposals aimed at addressing implicit bias within law enforcement. These included mandatory training programs, stricter oversight mechanisms, and independent review boards to investigate misconduct claims. She also advocated for community-led initiatives designed to rebuild trust between marginalized groups and the police. Her efforts gained traction quickly. Lawmakers introduced legislation inspired by her recommendations, proposing sweeping changes to how departments handled racial profiling cases. City councils held hearings where residents could voice their concerns about policing practices, ensuring grassroots perspectives were included in the conversation. Even some police unions, typically resistant to reform, acknowledged the need for change, albeit reluctantly. It was a small step, but one Maya saw as progress nonetheless. Back in her personal life, however, the emotional toll of the ordeal lingered. Despite the outpouring of support, Maya found herself grappling with moments of doubt and exhaustion. Trolls continued to harass her online, accusing her of exaggerating the situation or seeking fame. Comment sections beneath news articles about her story devolved into toxic debates, with some dismissing her experiences as overblown. Friends urged her to step away from social media, but Maya resisted. She knew staying engaged was crucial, not just for her own healing, but for the movement she had inadvertently sparked. One particularly challenging day came when a prominent news outlet published an op-ed questioning whether Maya's response during the incident had been overly confrontational. The author argued that she should have complied with the officer's requests instead of escalating the situation. Outrage erupted online as supporters rushed to defend her, pointing out the inherent flaw in blaming victims for standing up to injustice. Maya addressed the criticism head-on in a live video, her tone calm but firm. "I'm tired of being told I should have stayed quiet or smiled through humiliation because someone else decided I didn't belong," she said, looking directly into the camera. "This isn't about what I did or didn't do, it's about why I was targeted in the first place. If we keep shifting the focus onto victims, we'll never address the real problem, the biases and prejudices embedded in our systems." Her words resonated deeply, sparking another wave of solidarity. Supporters rallied around her, flooding the outlet's social media pages with complaints until the article was removed. For Maya, it was a reminder of the power of collective action, and proof that speaking truth to power, no matter how uncomfortable, was worth it. As the months rolled on, the case entered its final stages. A disciplinary hearing determined that both officers had violated department policies regarding conduct and professionalism. They were officially terminated, a decision celebrated by activists across the country. News outlets hailed the outcome as a victory for accountability, though Maya remained cautiously optimistic. She understood that firing two individuals wouldn't dismantle centuries of systemic racism overnight. But it was a start. In the aftermath, Maya turned her attention to long-term solutions. She partnered with advocacy groups to launch educational campaigns targeting schools, workplaces, and community centers. Through workshops and seminars, she taught people how to recognize and challenge implicit bias in everyday interactions. Her goal was simple yet ambitious: to create a world where no one else had to endure what she had gone through. By year's end, Maya's impact was undeniable. Cities nationwide adopted versions of the policies she championed, implementing measures to combat racial profiling and improve police-community relations. Activists credited her with reigniting conversations about systemic racism, inspiring a new generation of advocates to take up the cause. Awards poured in, recognizing her bravery and leadership, but Maya humbly deflected the praise. "This isn't about me," she often said. "It's about all of us working together to build a fairer, more equitable society." And so, as she stood on stage accepting yet another accolade, Maya reflected on how far she'd come. From a quiet evening at a restaurant to becoming a symbol of resilience and hope, her journey had been anything but ordinary. But she knew the fight was far from over. There were still battles to wage, injustices to expose, and hearts to change. With unwavering determination, she vowed to keep pushing forward, for herself, for her community, and for generations to come. Months had passed since the night that changed Maya's life forever. The restaurant incident, once a deeply personal and humiliating moment, had transformed into a catalyst for change, a movement that inspired thousands to confront systemic racism head-on. For Maya, the journey was far from easy, but it taught her something profound. Pain, when channeled properly, could become purpose. After the disciplinary hearings concluded with the termination of the two officers, the public celebrated the outcome as a victory, yet Maya knew better than to view this as the end of the fight. She often reminded herself and others that firing two individuals wasn't enough to dismantle centuries of ingrained prejudice. Real change required sustained effort, education, and a collective commitment to addressing the root causes of racial bias, and so she dedicated herself to building a legacy that would outlast headlines and hashtags. Maya began traveling across the country, speaking at conferences, universities, and community events. Her talks weren't just about her own experience, they were calls to action. She shared stories of resilience, her own and those of countless others who had faced discrimination silently or publicly. She challenged audiences to reflect on their own biases and encouraged them to take tangible steps toward allyship. "Awareness is important," she would say during these speeches, "but awareness without action is meaningless. We need to do more than talk. We need to act." Her advocacy work extended beyond public speaking. Maya partnered with organizations focused on criminal justice reform, helping draft policies aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within law enforcement. One of her proudest achievements was the launch of a nationwide initiative called Project Respect, which provided free training sessions for police departments on implicit bias and cultural sensitivity. The program also included input from marginalized communities, ensuring their voices shaped the curriculum. Within its first year, over 50 cities adopted the program, marking a significant step toward bridging the gap between law enforcement and the people they served. But Maya didn't stop there. Recognizing the importance of representation in media, she collaborated with filmmakers to create a documentary chronicling her story and the broader issue of racial profiling. Titled, "Someone Like Me." The film wove together interviews, archival footage, and expert commentary to paint a vivid picture of systemic racism's impact on everyday lives. When it premiered at a prestigious film festival, it received standing ovations and critical acclaim. Critics praised its raw honesty and ability to spark meaningful conversations. Within weeks of its release, schools and organizations began using it as an educational tool, further amplifying Maya's message. Despite her growing influence, Maya remained grounded. She understood the weight of being a public figure and made a conscious effort to stay connected to her roots. Every weekend she volunteered at local shelters and mentoring programs, working directly with young Black women navigating similar challenges. These interactions reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place, not for fame or recognition, but to create opportunities for others to thrive. One particularly memorable day came when she visited a high school in her hometown. As she walked into the auditorium, she was greeted by thunderous applause. Students lined up afterward to ask questions, share their dreams, and thank her for inspiring them. A teenage girl named Jasmine approached her last, tears streaming down her face. "I've been told I don't belong my whole life," Jasmine confessed, clutching Maya's hand tightly. "But seeing you stand up makes me believe I can too." In that moment, Maya felt a surge of emotion. She pulled Jasmine into a hug, whispering, "You belong everywhere you choose to be. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." It was a reminder of the ripple effect her actions had created, how one person's courage could inspire another to find theirs. Of course, not everyone supported Maya's efforts. Trolls continued to attack her online, accusing her of exploiting her story for personal gain. Some critics dismissed her initiatives as performative, claiming they wouldn't lead to real change. At times, the negativity wore her down, but Maya refused to let it define her. Instead, she leaned on her support system, her family, friends, and the countless strangers who sent messages of encouragement. Their belief in her mission kept her going, even on the hardest days. As time went on, Maya's influence reached new heights. She wrote a memoir detailing her journey, from growing up in a modest household to becoming a symbol of resistance. Titled, Claiming My Place. The book became a bestseller, praised for its vulnerability and authenticity. Readers described it as both heartbreaking and empowering, saying it gave them hope and strength. Oprah Winfrey selected it for her book club, calling Maya a beacon of light in dark times. The success of the memoir opened doors to even greater opportunities. Maya appeared on major talk shows where hosts lauded her bravery and vision. She joined panels alongside civil rights icons, contributing her perspective to discussions about equality and justice. In 2024, she was invited to speak at the United Nations during a global summit on human rights. Standing on stage before world leaders, she delivered a powerful speech about the importance of dismantling systemic racism and creating inclusive societies. By the end, the room erupted in applause, cementing her status as a global advocate for change. Yet, through all the accolades and achievements, Maya never lost sight of what truly mattered: the people. She understood that real progress happened not in boardrooms or on stages, but in classrooms, neighborhoods, and living rooms. That's why she continued prioritizing grassroots efforts, working closely with communities to address their unique needs. Whether it was organizing voter registration drives, funding scholarships for underprivileged students, or hosting town halls to discuss policy changes, Maya ensured her work remained accessible and impactful. Years later, as she sat in her cozy apartment reflecting on everything that had transpired, Maya felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The scars of that fateful night at the restaurant still lingered, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they served as reminders of how far she and society had come. The officer's insults, once intended to demean her, had ultimately fueled her determination to make a difference. They regretted their words now, not because they faced consequences, but because Maya turned their ignorance into inspiration. Her legacy lived on, not just in the policies enacted or the movements sparked, but in the hearts of those she touched. Young girls like Jasmine grew up believing they belonged anywhere they chose to go. Communities rallied together, refusing to accept injustice silently. And Maya, once a marketing executive enjoying a quiet dinner, became a symbol of resilience and hope. For Maya, the journey wasn't perfect, it rarely is, but it was worth it. She had taken her pain and transformed it into purpose, proving that even in the face of adversity, courage and compassion could spark transformation. And as she looked out at the city skyline shimmering with promise, she whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning."